Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference 2025. And today we have Adam Cox. How are you?
I'm very well, John. Excellent to be here.
Excellent. Back for year two.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, last year talking about nested loops, and this year talking about hypnosis and the fourth dimension.
Wow. Okay, you're going to have to give us a little bit of an outline on that. But for those of you who weren't there last year, and I'm sure there'll be loads more who'll be watching, who is Adam Cox?
So I'm a hypnotherapist. I got into hypnosis as a teenager. Just saw a few stage hypnosis shows, read a few books. Actually, I really got into hypnosis when I had severe social anxiety when I was about 19 years old. So I wanted to kind of fix myself. Ironically, I was doing a psychology degree at the time, and it worked. It really kind of helped me at that time. Went into business and then actually became a qualified hypnotherapist around about 11, 12 years ago. Um, Worked in Harley Street for around about 5 years, and had quite high profile clients there. Then COVID came along, left Harley Street, set up a podcast, and that's how a lot of people know me now is through a podcast called The Hypnotist.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal success. Absolutely phenomenal success. What is it? Nearly 10. Yeah, you have to give us the numbers for it because they're mind-blowing,
Yeah.
actually.
So the latest is 9.7 million downloads for the Hypnotist podcast. And if we include YouTube views of that as well, it's over 10 million downloads.
That's fantastic. And I mean, you use a lot of metaphor in those, don't you? Nested loops in particular. That's basically
Yeah.
what.
I kind of feel like because I do about a podcast episode daily, um, if I just do the same technique with clients again and again, it gets very repetitive. So I'm
Hmm.
kind of looking to have a real impact for the clients that I'm working with, and create something interesting and a different dynamic. And I feel like the great thing about metaphors and stories is that even if the technique is the same, it sounds completely different. So it makes it more interesting for me. So yeah, I use a lot of nested loops, a lot of storytelling, a lot of metaphor, and I get inspiration from books and movies and TV shows and even poetry and song lyrics. Like I can find inspiration for hypnosis everywhere.
Right. Okay. Because I think I think I remember you telling me, and I think you did it when we were in Dublin. You showed the movie that kind of sparked it all, which was just
It
remind
was
me.
Limitless. Yeah,
That's it.
the movie it was Limitless with Bradley Cooper and Robert De Niro, where the Bradley Cooper character takes a pill called NZT and then supercharges his brain. And then there was a spike in audience figures after that. And then I did one based on um, Inception, a book called The Richest Man in Babylon, The Alchemist, one of my favorite books. So I started getting inspiration from lots of different things, and even Fight Club. And that got weird because in Hypno Thoughts, the writer of Fight Club was actually in the audience, which was funny. So yeah, I try and get inspiration and insight from all different sources.
It's because it is wonderful because I've listened to quite a few of the episodes and I don't get to hear them all of them. Obviously, I'm not because I don't know how many you've done at this stage to get 10 million downloads, but
Yeah, it's about 1,500 coming up to.
I've listened to them all. But I mean, they really are. They're really inspiring. Um, and so you is the fourth dimension talk that you're doing, is that along similar lines or how
What I
would you
found
describe?
is that some of the movies that I found interesting for inspiration uh, utilize certain principles that can't exist in our reality. So, like the time travel genre, for example, I think is a great TV and kind of movie genre, but we can't actually physically go through time. And things with multiple realities, again, you can't actually visit different realities here in the third dimension, but movies do that. So I found that some of the hypnosis sessions that I was using was taking principles of multiple realities or different timelines and trajectories. And the more I looked into it, the more it seemed to me that when you look at what separates the fourth dimension from the third dimension, I mean, getting deep into physics, there's lots of differences, but the two key differences are that in the third dimension, time is linear. It only goes forward, and we measure that in seconds and minutes and hours. And in the fourth dimension, it's dynamic, it's fluid. So time can change at different speeds. You can go backwards and forwards in time. And then the second key distinction is perspective. So in the third dimension, the only perspective you have is your perspective, and that's your senses, your eyes, your ears. You see things from your perspective. In the fourth dimension, you've actually got multiple positions of perspective. And the more I looked into this, it's kind of like, well, we use things like time and perspective all the time in hypnosis. You can take on, levels of disassociation is a different perspective on the same thing. A reframe quite often is a different perspective on the same event. Lots of timeline and regression and trauma work involves going back in time to the point of trauma or the point of inception. And it dawned on me that if you looked at the principles of the fourth dimension and what we would broadly call the imagination, the inner world, they overlap a lot more than the inner world overlaps with the third dimension. So the metaphor that I use is, well, if imagination has a lot of principles similar with the fourth dimension, how do we harness the power of the fourth dimension? And there are clues in history. Einstein, when coming up with the general theory of relativity, imagine traveling on a beam of light, traveling close to the speed of light through the universe, and noticing the general relativity of time, that time is different depending on how close to the speed of light that you travel. But when he came back from his own thought experiment, that led to one of the most profound scientific theories in history, if not the most profound. So he was able to do something in his imagination that had real world impact in our reality. Lots of rocket ships and aviation is based on that theory. It's backed up by science, but it came from a thought experiment. So my talk on the fourth dimension is, well, if imagination has principles similar to the fourth dimension, what if hypnosis can be an interface so we can interact with the imagination more deliberately, not just for creativity and playfulness, but to actually make changes or glean insight from these kind of fourth dimensional principles that actually have real world impact when we return to our three-dimensional reality.
Well, in hypnosis, we use imagination all the time, so that actually makes perfect sense to me. Question, because it's just something that if somebody's listening, they may go, well, we do that in future pacing anyway. What's the difference, say, between fourth dimension and future pacing?
Yeah, so I would say fourth dimension is the principles. Future pacing is a technique. So one of the things that I talk about is good hypnotherapists are using a lot of these fourth dimensional principles anyway. Regression to cause and future pacing. We're treating time like it's fluid and dynamic, that we can navigate through time. We can encourage clients to take a different perspective. So when hypnotherapists use these things, they're implicitly and unconsciously agreeing with the presupposition that the inner world is more like the fourth dimension than it is the third dimension anyway.
Mhm.
But if we really looked at it as a four-dimensional realm, then it gives us additional things that we could use that we wouldn't normally think about. Future pacing generally is thinking about the future, normally disassociated the way you would want it to be.
Yeah.
But what if you could entertain 5 different futures and then choose the future that is the most desirable to you? What if you could go back to a point in trauma from the past and the future collide at that point in time? So you can play with multiple realities, multiple timelines, and multiple perspectives. And therefore, it gives us an infinite toolkit to kind of do more deliberate and specific things rather than broadly future pacing. It's kind of like, okay, well, how do we do this more deliberately and with more refinement than just broad terms?
Really fascinating. As you were talking, I was remembering, I think it was something that Tony did, or maybe it was something else. I can't remember, but it was somewhere that I came across it. that when you wanted to say imagine your future, you had kind of a boardroom where the people who you admired might be sitting around the table and you take the best from both of those. And that's if you like almost just looking into the future but accepting the present as it is. Well, you're actually talking about those using that future to go back and actually change the past. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, partly that. I think the key thing is that there is infinite possibilities within the fourth dimension. The third dimension is bound by the rules of physics as we know them. The
Yes.
fourth dimension, we've got so much more kind of options. One of the things I talk about is a client that I worked with that had an MRI scan for breast cancer to see if a tumor was increasing, but they hadn't had the results yet. And while I was working with that client, it dawned on me that that's very similar to the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment. That before the box is opened, the cat is both alive and dead, which gets us into the realm of quantum physics,
Yeah.
and quantum realities. So with that client, I actually had her imagine traveling to the event horizon, the point where all gravity is compressed in a black hole, and beyond the event horizon enabled her to experience all the different possibilities that that MR result could bring. That it could actually show her being clear that the tumor is now benign. But crucially, also got her thinking about a future where she got news that the tumor was growing, but that she could handle that news. So it was enabling her to kind of experience all these different kind of possibilities. In the end, actually, she got the feedback that actually the tumor was shrinking. Um, Now, there is this kind of idea of manifestation and kind of suggestion. You don't have to believe that. I think it's good to future pace a client so that whatever happens, they can feel resourceful and kind of in a good position. But it used this idea of kind of multiple realities to prime a future resource state, irrespective of what the actual news was. For me, it's just a very flexible metaphor that gives more options.
It's absolutely beautiful, actually. As you're describing it, my mind is just run 90 to the dozen here, but that's brilliant. I love it. I love it. I'm looking forward to this now. Really looking forward to it. Because I always enjoy your stuff. We were talking earlier, I used a lot of disassociation, which is similar to metaphor in terms of getting stuff done, because I know just the power of it, of making change when people are so far, when they consider. And as I think another quote from Einstein is, you can never solve a problem from the same space in which you created it. So if you can allow people to go out into that future space.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I talk about isn't just kind of, different probabilities, but different realities. So this idea of a multiverse, that there are every decision, every interaction you've ever experienced creates a different reality. Well, what if we traveled to the reality where you're living your best life? Isn't that highly likely to have lots of resource states or insights or kind of strategies that could be helpful? So these are the things that I'm talking about. I don't think as three-dimensional beings we're ever going to experience a fourth dimension. That would be like a two-dimensional comic strip character living in our three-dimensional reality. Like, it's not really plausible for that to happen. But I think there's only two ways in which we as three-dimensional humans will ever interact with something close to the fourth dimension. One, I think, is yeah, our inner imagination, our inner world. And the second is technology like VR headsets and the metaverse. I think you could have similar experiences where you can take on multiple positions and you can travel through time and that kind of stuff. But I'm not a coder, I'm not a developer, I'm a hypnotist. So I can talk about the fourth dimension from a hypnotic perspective of how do we harness the fourth dimensional principles that exist within our imagination.
So we have a technology-free way of providing 4D and all those glasses and everything else through hypnosis,
Yeah, and
basically.
that's it. And Einstein was able to have a thought experiment without having, a VR headset traveling on the speed of light. He just did that in his imagination, and lots of very things. I think J.K. Rowling, to write all of the Harry Potter books, probably spent a lot of time in a reality that didn't exist, and
Yes.
yet became very, very wealthy from spending a lot of time in an imaginary place. There is real world
Absolutely.
benefits to spending time in your imagination if you can harvest it and bring it back into your three-dimensional reality.
And if you think about it, isn't that what we all do? Isn't that where our growth patterns come from as children? Because we live in that imaginary state anyway, and it's where our beliefs, habits, and behaviors are formed. So
Absolutely.
all we're doing is taking control of it as an adult. I
Yeah,
love it.
by design. That's it.
By design, absolutely. I love it. And it's good. It's going to be wonderful to see you back in Dublin again in April. I
Looking forward
can't
to it.
wait. It's our largest conference yet. And yeah, it's going to be fantastic. So thank you. And to everyone who's watching, make sure that you come and see Adam in on the 5th and 6th of April in Dublin. Take care.
See you there.
Bye.